When should the EGP process move into answer mode?
So this is actually a much more architectural question. So EGP itself doesn't move into answer mode. It's think of it as a kind of stage, right? So what you're asking is when do we transition from EGP to AGP, or the next stage, right? So it's not so much about EGP as it is about the larger architecture through which the community is moving through its process. There's a number of ways of thinking about this, and to some extent, this is still one of those questions for which I'm feeling like there's some open things. Like I don't feel that I have complete answers to this question. So treat this as a work in progress from this point here forward. Okay. One of the things that's kind of an intermediate step between asking questions and looking for answers is a thing I call values discovery. So in other words, it's not so much that we want to go from question asking to question answering, so much as we're wanting to basically understand what is the generative basis from which we create answers. Now, what is the generative basis? That sounds like a question that occurs inside of EGP, but it's not so much that the question is important in that case, so much as that the consciousness of what are the values that we're using to inform our choices. Like, what does success look like? Like I was asked that literally a minute ago. What does a successful EGP look like? Well, in this particular case, we could say we have people that are interacting with one another in a free way. They're not reacting from trauma. They're actually acting rather than reacting. Secondly, everybody knows what everybody knows, and everybody feels that it's that they have a sense as to what they know of themselves is important. Right? So there's kind of a reciprocity between I think it's important, and I notice that other people are thinking this is important too, because those questions got a lot of attention because they got formed into groups, and child questions came from those very fruitfully. So, in effect, when it gets to a place that the overall group of people is basically saying, no, we actually feel like we've explored the question space pretty well, and we know what matters to us. Right? If we get to a place where everybody's saying, this is the complete list of questions that if answered, I would feel that all of the things I cared about were addressed. Let me go back to a thing that I didn't mention in this call, but it's in the literature associated with EGP. It's a kind of a scenario. Say, for example, you are a citizen in a community somewhere or another, and it's one of those towns that has a mayor, for example, and the mayor is responsible for making some choice that's going to be pretty impactful. And maybe as a citizen, you have some concerns about that choice, like what the mayor's going to do. So what I would say to the citizen is I would say, what is the question that if you knew that the mayor was asking this question, would have you feel that the concerns that you had were getting addressed? I'll give you an explicit example. Say, for example, you have children, and the mayor's deciding, like let's call it an early town, and the town is out on the frontier, and they want to buy paint because they need to preserve the wood of all the houses, and the town can't afford more than one color or more than one kind of paint, so they're going to buy paint and they're going to give it to all the citizens, and they'll paint all the houses, right? And that's how the town's going to solve. And the mayor is essentially making a choice as to which company he's going to buy the paint from. You have children, and you're thinking to yourself, shit, I need to know that the paint that this guy buys doesn't have lead in it because I don't want my kids to have lead exposure. So I might say, I have a concern. Is the mayor asking the suppliers whether or not they have paint that has lead in it? And does the mayor know for sure that the paint that they're receiving doesn't have lead in it? Is there some way that I can get reassured that the mayor is even thinking about this issue? Because, the number of things that are going on in the universe is enormous, right? It could easily be the case that of just an oversight, nobody thought to ask, is there lead in the paint? They might not even know that matters. This is a relatively modern thing that we understand that lead's important, right? And if, for example, the question never gets asked, then it's a 50-50 that it might be the case that we end up with paint that's actually toxic, and our children will suffer. So I want to know that somebody's asking this question. If I know that they're asking this question, and if I know they know why it matters, then I would feel comfortable that he'll do the right thing because he has children too. So in that sense, it may be the case that all I really need to do is to know, has the mayor been asking the question, does the supplier provide paint that has lead in it? And if the answer is yes, then he's going to probably choose something else. And if the supplier says no, that is the mayor going to be able to tell? And if the mayor knows what to look for and what questions to ask to be able to tell, then I'm going to feel reassured that the right thing's going to happen. So what I basically do is I go to the citizen and I say, what are the concerns that you have? How do I turn those into questions? And if those questions were asked, would those questions put your mind to rest? And if they don't, then we're not asking the right questions yet. But if they are, then now we have a way to actually move the situation forward, genuinely. So in effect, what we're looking for here is, has the set of questions that the community developed as a totality been a subsumptive set to the degree that the community itself feels at rest with that set of questions? In other words, can the members of the community basically feel that the generated set of questions from the EGP event actually addresses the full scope of their concerns? That's a diversity question. And if it does, that's a finite list, but it might be a large one. But on the other hand, when people say, yeah, everything I can think of that's important is asked, then there's obviously no reason not to move on to the answer stage. But again, it's not so much that we can answer the questions, it's do we have the capacity to answer the questions? So at some point or another, we're looking to have the questions be the tool through which the values are themselves expressed, right? So in other words, it's not just, does the mayor even know that lead's important? Does the mayor ask the supplier, is this going to have lead in it? And what paint don't have lead in it? It's also going to be, does the mayor have the capacity to ask the questions to be able to tell whether the supplier is lying? Right? So he might ask, his neighbor who's got some analytic equipment, hey, can you test this thing for lead? I want to check. So he might ask the supplier, hey, send me a sample. And how do I know that this sample is from the actual paint that you would send us? Right? So you can see that the questions themselves start acting as a kind of reification basis by which I can create trust. Right? It increases the skillfulness, the willingness, and the availability of the participants of the community to engage with one another. That increases the effectiveness, which increases the capacity to actually answer questions that matter.